Welcome to another one of our very exciting webinars at Nuix, and particularly talking about some of our new solutions across the Neo family of products and solutions. Today, we are going to focus on particularly around our data breach and part of our data privacy solution. So we'll talk about some of the hidden risks in securing data and what can organizations do to look at strengthening breach readiness. So let's get started. Before we kick off the actual formal session, just a couple of housekeeping things. At the end of the webinar, there will be a survey, and we would very much appreciate if you could give us your thoughts and observations in terms of how you thought the webinar went and the content that was covered, and if you'd like to see anything else. The recording will be available and sent out separately, so you will have the opportunity to not just go through it, but also share with your colleagues so that if they have missed out, they can catch up. So today, it'll be myself, Arnie Bhattacharya. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Nuix and responsible for our product and solutions that you, our customers, get to work on and tell us how you're going with solving real-world problems. And there's also Aidan, who is our Head of Product Solutions, and Aidan's going to be taking us through a live demonstration. So not only will you get the context of why we've done it and how other organizations are benefiting, but how you can use it. So that's the agenda for today. We'll keep it very sharp in terms of setting the landscape, just painting the picture of why we have been so enthused about bringing the solution to market and helping our customers adopt to really solve the challenges around the breach scenarios, both in terms of when a breach happens and also the readiness. We'll talk about what is actually involved and included as part of the Neo Data Breach Readiness, and then you'll get to see it in action. So that'll be the really exciting way of ending the webinar. So with that, let's get started. Setting the scene a little bit, the information about knowledge and data breaches that are happening right across the spectrum, across the globe at the moment, it's fairly regular news now. Unfortunately, it seems like nearly every day we get to hear about or receive an email from a company that we've interacted with previously, alerting us that there was a potential data breach, or there has been some, we only come to know when it's hit the news. We do have a large number of corporations and public agencies who are regularly undergoing investigations and scrutiny around their data breach. Since our last Accelerate, which is our global conference, which if you haven't had a chance to attend, I'd strongly encourage you to attend next time. If you only look at some of the top data breaches that have happened since then to now, there's been an estimated over 7 billion records that have been compromised just since 2023. Just in January this year, the Far Eastern Research Center for Space Hydrometeorology, the Planeta, was breached with an estimated 2 petabytes of data. So the scale of data breaches is not reducing, but significantly increasing with the cyber exposure. Cybercrime has become a very common scenario that organizations have to deal with, and with each passing year, with the greater extent of digitization, research shows that nearly 800,000 personal and business records are lost or compromised on average every single day. So with more and more people falling victims, the cybercrime that is taking place each year, we need to take steps to protect ourselves and that of our employees. So more importantly, so that our customers' data is safe and secure. Data breaches are becoming more commonplace. There is just no two ways about it. What we can do is understand, based on the frequency and the scale of such incidents, what do organizations need to do to implement a strong data protection measure and be ready for any incident response plans to help minimize the risk of breaches and be able to see what they can do to take protective steps. So really, if we look through what's been happening in this sphere, the regular news elements all across corporates and public organizations and related scandals have certainly been very topical throughout the space. And if we look at what happens with a data breach, what gets stolen, and what is the impact, it's not that the data isn't necessarily the initial theft, but it's often sold on to other nefarious folks in bulk in online auctions, which then turns into more of data sets that is used to commit ongoing fraud. So this increasing frequency and the scale of these breaches, it really leads to increasing regulations, no matter what sector you're in, which means that even more work has to be done where we want to be able to handle the breach scenarios. And risk and compliance teams are having to significantly scale up their ability to be able to deal with regulations and manage data hygiene scenarios. If we look at what the impact of data breach is and the privacy regulation around the globe that is trying to keep up with it, this is actually quite a broader impact. So we know with the introduction of regulations like the Californian CCPA or the European GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, they've made significant strides in data privacy, data protection. They both require websites to ask for consent to track visitors' browsing activity. It is based on these laws as consumers can choose to opt in and then have the ability to set a standard so that this becomes more of a widespread practice in the future. Organizations can't really don't have that luxury to turn a blind eye to cybersecurity any longer. A recent increase in regulations and enforcements means that organizations need to be careful about the serious reputation and financial risk that they run with such breaches. In Australia, for example, the Notifiable Data Breaches Scheme, which was introduced a couple of years ago as part of the Privacy Amendment Act of 2017, it requires organizations to notify individuals and the Office of the Information Commissioner on eligible breaches as soon as they happen. So what we see across the globe is that many of these incidents around the notifiable data breach and elements associated with that have certain key tenets. When there is a breach or unauthorized access or disclosure of personal information or any kind of loss, any consumer associated with the organization must be notified within a stipulated time period as soon as the organization comes to know about it. When it is to do with understanding and notification, and as you can see, some of the significant penalties that have been associated, if you look at with some of the very well recognized names that are on the screen right now, notification requirements also means that individuals whose personal information has been involved in an eligible breach has to be contacted and notified of what has happened in similar situations fairly quickly. There are significant penalties, and other than penalties alone, there is a huge risk of reputational damage that comes with many of these incidents, which is really what organizations, both private and public, need to try and protect themselves from. So the trend, this is happening across all major and emerging economies. So this is not one that we can be ignorant to or avoid, given what is happening and is a very emerging threat on a regular basis. So let's talk a little bit about the explosive growth of data. Data that is around us, we are all knowingly or unknowingly using many kinds of digital devices that are acting as beacons, acting as data collectors, and have significant amounts of data collected within the device and being shared in other sort of cloud or non-cloud backup environments. One of the most interesting statistics around the explosive growth of data is in 2024, Statista, the website, estimated that there is approximately 181 zettabytes, which frankly I can't even imagine in terms of the volume. That's the volume of data that will be created, captured, or copied and consumed worldwide. And this is up from the previous year of about 140 odd zettabytes. So if you put that in perspective, that's about approximately 400 million terabytes per day. That's the equivalent, just to put it in context, to giving out everyone in the US, for example, and the UK, a full top-of-the-line iPhone every single day. So just think of that in terms of the scale. We can already see that it's grown to a point where it's become thoroughly abstracted from the public eye, especially with cloud providers offering cheaper alternatives and ways to store more data. It's a magic box in the sky where you can put your data in and you think you've deleted it, but you probably never will. So this is growing, and it is significantly a challenge to try and manage and maintain in this very highly cyber intensive scenario today. So let's sort of figure this out with a real simple example. If we think about the first iPhone that was launched back in 2007, it's been a while. I don't know if many of you remember what the initial storage was, which is only around 4 gigabytes, went up to about 16 gigabytes of data. Today's flagship iPhone, the 15 Pro Max and the recently released 16, that has up to 1 terabyte. So in about 16 years, the data that we carry in our pockets has increased by approximately 6,500%. Just to let that sink in, the significant amount of growth from a simple device that we carry around with us has grown to such an extent in just over a decade and a half. And it's not just the volume that is increasing, it's also the variety of information and the types of sources that are constantly increasing. So we know that every year there is a social media platform or a different kind of a way for the next generation to be interacting and interfacing with their friends and colleagues, and everyone's jumping on to new platforms for the, so to avoid FOMO, fear of missing out. And we want to be able to understand that each new platform brings with it new challenges and potentially important sources of data that can be used as evidence in any sort of scenario of interaction. One of these examples is reactions. So if we look at the introduction of reactions, which one could trace back to 2005 in the form of like buttons at Vimeo, the online video management portal introduced with the ability for users to indicate if they had an interest or they had a particular like towards a particular video. It was soon adopted over a period of time across different platforms for the like, the thumbs up, and various other forms. From a corporate perspective or a government organizational perspective, this is a very interesting scenario because it actually hooks into the sentiments of users and the community in terms of how they are interacting, what they're responding to, and in a way represents what their view is with a like or a dislike. And these kinds of emotions or reactions have evolved as we've gone through the different types of chat platforms. So this leads us to another very interesting scenario. Not only is the world growing in terms of the significant jump in the data volume and how we deal with this in comprehensively large data sphere, but how does it lead to not just larger, more pertinent, more obvious data sets, but also those such as reactions which demonstrate or represent a certain reaction and a sentiment of the community of users. So when we put all of this together at a very high level, what it means is that when there is a breach, there are multiple elements that take place. So not only is there reputational damage in terms of obviously what is reported in the press or the reaction from the community, but also a big part of it is financial penalties, which sometimes seem like it's only the initial penalty of a certain amount of money which comes through, but it can result in many other impacts such as loss of trust, which leads to attrition, which leads to loss in consumer confidence, which is associated with the brand. And therefore that leads to market impact, both in terms of brand value, brand recognition, and the consciousness in the consumer's mind about them or the public demand in being associated with the government services. So there is a broad-ranging set of impacts associated with a breach event. Now, what we would like to go through and consider is in your organization, how well you think you know about the kind of data that is stored across the spectrum of corporate repository or the government body repository. And how do you know if the data and the data sets that are there complies with privacy regulations? And more importantly, do you believe that your organization is adequately prepared for data breaches or for such cybersecurity threats? I mean, it's quite important and a key portfolio in many organizations that there is a cyber division, but quite often we know that it is a lot goes into perimeter protection in terms of trying to safeguard and create a moat. But in the scenario that a breach does occur, the very important question is, of the data, how much is the unprotected personally identifiable information, or is there a swathe of sensitive information such as IP or clinical trials or any other sort of customer or private sensitive data that is stored that can be exposed in the event of a breach, which none of us want, but we know is a reality. If that happens, how do we know the organization has a good understanding and protection? So this is where we want to bring it together in terms of Nuix Neo and our solution from a data breach readiness perspective. And the proposition here is that the intent is to really simplify and make it obviously accessible with regards to running a scan across the general repository set within an organization, whether it be a private or a public enterprise, and with very simple preset workflows, have the ability to extract a whole bunch of metadata, look at some simple reporting mechanisms carried out through sampling of data sets to really understand where the risk exposure is likely to be. And this is quite important because what we want to make sure is organizations are well aware before an incident could occur where their risk exposure is. Therefore, they can start to prepare and be ready in terms of taking any remediative action well before there is any sort of a scenario where a breach has happened and those who have been involved in the cyber incident are able to get access to personally identifiable information, health information, or any other sensitive information. So what we provide out of the box, and it is meant to support a very quick uptime, particularly in terms of the preparedness, a large swathe of nearly 200 different capabilities in terms of the different workflow steps. And it also allows for some significant items in terms of looking at carrying out a light metadata scan so that it doesn't have to go through and read every aspect of every item in the available repositories, but also a full lifecycle metadata and the data scan. So in scenarios such as if there is a requirement for identifying freedom of information, related custodians, related items, they can all be run right from the box, from out of the box, with a number of the pre-built models, with the whole focus being that it becomes simpler, easier, and faster to execute. And we all know that having this available is the real intent is to be able to get this quickly available via a dashboard, a way that it brings together all of this information. So the intent is through our dashboards to make it simple to understand what is the kind of data that has been looked at and scanned, what is the type of exposure that an organization, say a chief data officer or a risk officer or a chief information security officer or any of the legal teams are looking to understand their potential risk exposure. They're able to run this, they're able to see an assessment, understand what kind of data there is, who it belongs to, and even get a sense of how old the data set is. Because this is one of those areas where many organizations kind of forget along the journey that whilst they're doing the right thing in collecting information that they need to act on, in most jurisdictions, there are typically limited periods for which the data must be kept, and beyond which they really should be taking care of the correct way to have the data lifecycle managed and expunge any irrelevant data sets. So what we have is the opportunity to leverage what we call our risk magnitude report, which really has the ability to expose through the automatic identification of personally identifiable information or any sort of related sensitive data, and very quickly draw out where these types of data assets are, but also in particular any related items by some of the predefined categories, which means that when someone needs to be able to identify this in a very detailed level and be able to really pinpoint and focus on where the remediation effort needs to be, it can very simply be identified through not just a summary dashboard, but allowing the analyst to go in and look at it in detail, which means that in a great way from an information governance perspective, not only are you applying a risk lens and being able to look at it in terms of the potential risk exposure, through this tool and mechanism, anyone in an organization is able to also get a quick understanding of the metadata and the types of data sets that are available across the many different repositories within the organization. So with that, we now move on to the next part of the really exciting element of the webinar to look at the data breach readiness in action. I will hand it over to you, Aidan.
Thank you very much, Arnie, and good day, everyone. My name's Aidan Jewell. I'm the Head of Product Solutions here at Nuix, and it's my great pleasure here today to show you the data privacy solution, including the data breach notification solution workflows. Now, as Arnie was detailing, the data privacy solution really helps our customers to identify the risk within the data that an organization holds. Not only to identify the risk, but also to identify that data where you can make an educated decision on how you handle that. Now, by that I mean, if you identify files with a lot of risk within them, you can choose to quarantine, move, delete, or put under stricter controls those items. Conversely, you can also use this workflow, as Arnie was alluding to as well, to identify rot data and dark data. Data that the last estimations can take up to 85% of a company's data sphere in data that is irrelevant or redundant, obsolete, and trivial. Yet data that can pose a risk, both as being exposed to an internal or external malicious actor, but also data that gets in the way of a speedy report when you have to have a regulatory compliance timeline to attend to. So I'm going to show you today a couple of different workflows from beginning to end and show you some highlights along the way of how we can help identify the data and help you make an informed decision on how you remediate or act upon that data. So I'm in Nuix Neo now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the start. I'm going to hop into Nuix Automate. And I'm going to walk through one of our many workflows. And in particular, this one is related to the analysis or searching of data on scale and the generation of the magnitude report. So if I come here, I'm just going to pause on here and show that the data privacy solution ships with a number of different workflows. And some of them are targeted around helping you collect data from various sources. And once you've collected some of that data, or if you just want to start right from the beginning, you can use this workflow. You can then take that data, run it through and perform, have the Nuix Automate perform a number of stages to prepare that data, enrich that data, and make a number of different reports available to you. So I won't go through the entire workflow, but I will just cover a couple of key points. One in particular is adding in various different connections that we will utilize later, and pulling in the data and processing just as you would normally process using the Nuix engine. Then we start to tag items that are going to be relevant for analysis with our cognitive AI solution, Nuix Enrich, and then push those items to be enriched by our cognitive AI engine. What this does is it enables you to easily categorize and filter various different documents and data types within your data set, so you can quickly find documents of importance and have those kind of made more brought to the surface for you. You can also use our cognitive AI to help identify the risk within your data. So one of the parts of the NLP models that I'll show you shortly enables you to assign risk ratings depending on what kind of data is found within your files. So a spreadsheet that contains a lot of personally identifiable information, for example, would be given a much higher risk rating than an email that just contains a name and maybe an address, for example. You can also use these to filter out information that, as I said before, could be dark data, machine-generated data of no real value other than keeping the lights on in your servers, and also, more importantly, rot, redundant, obsolete, or trivial data, highlighting information that you can choose to delete, quarantine, or simply just put on a data retention policy. Getting rid of data you do not need both reduces the amount of servers you need to keep switched on, and therefore reduces your energy expenditure, and therefore leads you towards maybe one day becoming a carbon neutral company. But also, it reduces the amount of data that you will have to look through when you get breached or when you get served the regulatory or compliance response. So, analyzing the data through our cognitive AI can help you highlight the data you should be worried about and the data that you can simply just do without. It will then start to generate the magnitude report that Arnie showed you before, and I'll walk you through a live example of that shortly. And it will also notify you when the case is done. This Nuix Automate tool is not just to simply run through a few manual stages automatically, but it's an enterprise level orchestration tool, which means that I can have multiple users within this queuing jobs, and as long as I have the resources available to me, those jobs can run in parallel and in serial, just to smash through all of your data processing needs as quickly as possible to get the data you need into your reviewers' hands as quickly as possible. In a normal example, I would then point this at this particular workflow at some data and let it run. It's no fun to look through a status bar while on the demonstration. So I'm going to jump back into Nuix Investigate where I have a case prepared. I'm going to come into this XCore bank. This is where I've taken that same workflow, the CBN process through to magnitude report, and I have enriched and processed this data. As a result of that workflow, I will have got a notification, an email sent to me, which also contains the magnitude report. So Arnie showed an example within the slides. I'd like to walk through one on the screen with you. You can see that it is a large and well-detailed Excel spreadsheet that contains information extracted and interpolated from the data that you have processed through the data privacy workflow. On the first tab, you see a summary of information about the data that you have examined, including a breakout of all the top entity counts, or PII, that we've extracted from this data. So you can see there's 6 bank account numbers, 9 different credit card numbers, for example, CVVs, dates of birth, and potentially 88 passwords. You also see just a general summary of the data, similar to a normal processing report you might get through Nuix Neo, but also includes information around the types of data that you processed, any particular irregular items such as encrypted items, corrupted items, containers, etc. And then just a breakdown of the MIME types. So if you're running this across multiple file servers or cloud repositories, you can start to build up an idea of what is in your environment and what data you hold, so you can then make educated decisions later on how to handle that data. If we encountered any errors during this, as we hit files that might be encrypted or corrupted, for example, that will populate an errors tab down the bottom. But I'm going to come to this item list. What the item list does, it shows me all of the items of note that we need to take a look at, or potentially need to take a look at. You'll notice that each of them has a unique doc ID, so we can refer to them later on. And if I scroll to the right, we can see we're extracting a lot of information here. We're breaking them down into different classifications and different dictionaries. This is all part of our cognitive AI of helping you to categorize and contextualize your information, your files. I'll show you more of how that plays out later on. We also extract here a whole bunch of different PII. So you can see in all these documents, you can see a large number of passwords being brought out. And this report is fully interactive. So if I scroll down, there's one in particular I want to highlight, is this accounts list, and which would open up in a new tab within Investigate. So this has opened up directly the tab, the item within the case and Investigate. Now, I'm logged in currently. I have an active user session where I have administration rights. If someone else was to get hold of this magnitude report and then click on the links, if they do not have access to Investigate, they will be prompted to enter a username and password. And if they do not have authentication, they will not be able to log in and see the data. So we've baked a lot of security controls into this, so that only verified users that have access to the Nuix Neo platform and to the case which contains that information can log in and see that data. In this particular instance, the file that we looked at in the magnitude report, accountlist.csv, contains an awful lot of information that I would consider PII, or personally identifiable information. If I look at this tab over here, which contains our cognitive AI metadata, you can find, if I look at the risks level, go to entity risks, we're getting some counts in the high range. That would make sense to me. It looks like to the naked eye, it contains a lot of information. You can see it relates to several different dictionaries, arts and entertainment, building and construction. And more importantly, the highest match, even though it's fairly low, says that this looks like it could be a donor list. If I go back to the item metadata, I can see exactly where it is. So if I'm scanning a file share that has multiple owners of data within this, I can see all the metadata here. I'm just showing a restricted view, but I can go through and select a more in-depth view. But in particular, I can already see I have a person of interest now that contains, their folders contain essentially unencrypted data that has a lot of PII in. For myself, if I was to put myself in the compliance officer's shoes, that is a significant risk to the organization, and we would need to take action on that. Now, if I jump back into Nuix Investigate, what I want to do is show you that particular case in full. In fact, I will go through it from here. I'll reset this, which will now show me all of the data. And I will show you some of the results of passing that data through our cognitive AI. As we're going through and tagging various items during that workflow, we're creating a tag called responsive, which I can view all of the items that, as we've generated this workflow, that Nuix has automatically discerned are important for a reviewer to look at. This will be, a place that someone will log in and first take a look at. What has Nuix decided that we should look at first, based on the criteria that the user would set up? So the experts, the subject matter experts within the compliance or the risk team, would be able to very easily set up their own NLP models and very easily be able to set their risk ratings. And so that would then govern what Nuix determines is relevant or most relevant to, or most likely relevant for the reviewers to look at. But I'm going to actually take a different slant at this. I'm going to now approach this from if I'm looking for a particular type of document. So I'll just close this one. And I'm going to use this filter on our left-hand side, which is our cognitive AI features. And I just want to talk very briefly around dictionaries, risks, and skill sets. So when Nuix Cognitive AI or Nuix Enrich is enriching the data, when we're processing it through that automate workflow, we're essentially having our proprietary AI look at this data and determine three different things about it. What type of document is it? What does that document look like it is about? And what does that document contain? So I'll start with the first one. What does that document look like? Does it look like a newsletter or a accounts list or a donor list, as we saw before? These would be skill sets. So from the data within my case, I can see that we have these broad categories. And if I click on human resources, I can see that there are data within this case that flags on one or more of these. If I look in particular about confidentiality and non-disclosure agreement and hit search, this is telling the case to say, only show me the information that relates to these particular data sets. I'm not seeing anything for that one. I'm going to go for the whole of human resources. We can see a number of different ones here. So I'm including things like employment contract. If I come over to the metadata again, go to skill sets, I can see here we've got quite a few different ratings here. Our highest is probably around an employment termination letter, employment contract, etc. So if I know that I'm looking for a particular type of document during my investigation, or multiple types of documents, just that simple first step of understanding what type of document it is based on the context of the language within that document, we can then start our investigation a bit lower down rather than looking at absolutely everything. So the skill sets is around what type of document am I interested in looking at, or could this document be? The next one, which kind of follows on from that, is around dictionaries. What is this document about? So if I'm looking at a whole load of newsletters, for example, we can then further categorize those down into, is it a newsletter about war? Is it a newsletter about politics? Is it about finance or education or the environment? Being able to kind of compartmentalize even further can really help drill down to the potentially relevant or the most potentially relevant information first, so that our reviewers, when they first log in and utilize these filters, are having a much more of a qualitative approach to their review rather than quantitative. Rather than start at item 0 and head onwards, you can actually start looking at the most potentially relevant data first. And then the third one, which I've already touched around, is around the risk levels, or what does this document contain? If you're familiar with regular expressions, the ability to program in certain patterns that the computer would recognize for identifying things like a credit card number, this is along those lines, but also adding in some of the AI capabilities to understand the context of a document. By that I mean, a credit card number or a 16-digit number is more likely to be a credit card number if there are certain other qualities of the document or form that it is within. So it's more likely to be a credit card number if it is in close proximity to the words credit card number. Sounds quite obvious when a human explains it, but to a computer, without understanding the context of both the location of the search hits within the document and the context of the document itself, means it cannot infer a rating as to whether this is more or less likely to be a credit card number. Whereas with Nuix Enrich and cognitive AI, that's exactly what we can do. We can teach the AI how to understand the context of the document and the context of the location of pattern recognition within those. So we call them compound lexemes, being able to add in the pattern recognition of regular expressions with the contextual awareness that our AI brings. When we combine these three things together, we can then start building risk ratings out. And this is where the risks category comes in. I'm going to jump into Nuix NLP just to walk through that in a little bit more detail, as I think this will be valuable. So if I hop into Nuix Enrich, what I want to do is just show the model builder, which will show how we get to this. I'm going to pause and I'm going to cut this particular point out because I think this password is not going to load in and I want to remove it. Yeah. Bear with me. I will edit this part out later. I'm just logging into a different NLP instance where I know the password. So I think it's been changed in the other box. I'm getting impatient. I'll open another. Okay, so I'm in Nuix Enrich. This is our model testing part, the text editor. I just want to show very quickly the models and how they're built out. So I'll show just the one example around skill sets. If we go back to that human resources one that I showed before, come down into the confidentiality or non-disclosure, this is how simple it is to build and edit your models. You do not have to be a data scientist or understand how to write various different codes in order to generate models that can have instant impact when you're reviewing your data. All it takes is a handful of training documents. In this instance, we have 85. You can start from lower, and the more you add, the more accurate it gets, but you still have very accurate results from about 50 plus. That, when you add in the training documents, Nuix Enrich will then start to extract keywords and phrases it believes are relevant to that document. And then as the user, as a subject matter expert, you can say, well, if I'm looking at confidentiality or non-disclosure agreements for my particular organization, I know that yes, they contain confidential information. Yes, the phrase confidentiality agreement is in there, and so I will weight this heavily. But the words date and disclose, they appear in other documents as well, so maybe I'll weight those less. And all it is about adjusting the weighting is by dragging a slider from the right or to the left. So being able to create your own model can be done very swiftly. One of our Accelerate conferences, we did this in 45 minutes and led a group of people who'd never used Nuix Enrich before through this. And it means that you can tweak these to get the accurate results you need without needing to be a data scientist. Furthermore, it enables you to then capture and lock those. So if we've built models that we are happy with and we want some consistent results across that, say if I have to come back and perform another investigation or a matter or review later on, as long as no one has changed these, we can use them as such. I can actually export these and save them as well, and then reintroduce them later if I want to really make sure that when I run the same data through, I will get the same results. At Nuix, we have a responsible approach to AI. And one of those key points is defensibility and repeatability of this. This is our ethos for doing this, so that you do not have to try to explain away a black box operation that landed you at answers that you can't show the working for. we always want to be able to enable you to show the working of how you got to your information. So Nuix and Rich Part can really help to categorize and contextualize your information. And as part of the data privacy workflow, more importantly, with the magnitude report and the breach notification that I'll come into shortly, can really help you identify the riskiest data within your organization and enable you to take further steps upon that on what to do with that. All of this helps to serve having your environment have the risky data contained and protected and known about, and having your ROT data, your redundant, obsolete, and trivial data, reduced as much as possible, so that should you have an event that you need to respond to, you have less data to go through. To reduce defensively the amount and the scale of the haystacks you have to go through to find that needle. I'm now going to change tack. I'm going to look at a different case in this one and start to see, well, what would happen if we go through it a little bit further? Assume that we have been breached. We know that the data that has been compromised in some way or exfiltrated. Now we want to launch in, using the data privacy data breach notification workflows, to try to aggregate the PII to the people that we need to notify that we've had a breach. So in the event of a breach, various regulations around the world state that you have to notify your customers in the event of a breach and tell them what information has potentially been leaked, contaminated, should you change your passwords, etc. I'm sure we've all received emails from companies alerting us that they've had a breach and that they are informing us of this and what may or may not have been compromised. Some might say that we can confirm that no passwords have been leaked, but they still recommend that you change your passwords. Being able to notify your customers as to what has been or has not been contaminated or exfiltrated is a key part of a response to a breach. The data breach notification workflow can help you with that. So I'm going to walk through this one in a bit more detail. So this data breach notification workflow in Nuix Automate will enable you to take from raw data to actionable cases that you can then run through our knowledge graph, which will then help you to link entities, i.e. personally identifiable information, to the people that have been impacted by the breach. So this is a much longer workflow. It goes through a number of different stages, similar to the magnitude report point, but will go a step further. It will start to take key information, key entities designated by yourselves and with our assistance through Nuix Advantage, and then start to populate a database, a relational database with them, or a graph database with them. And then it will enable you to view that information within our knowledge graph, which is a fantastic visualization tool for matching information together and finding hidden links within that. I'm going to jump to a case where I can show this. And in particular, this is one that's actually going to go across a number of different cases. This is going to start with a consumer complaint. So the scenario for this is we're in a bank and that we have a hotline or an email address where people can raise complaints with the service they've had from our bank, with messaging that they've had, etc. This information through Nuix Neo Automate workflows can be automatically passed into a case, notification sent out to those who need to review it, so that as new information comes in, it's populated into a case, and keywords and phrases and entities can then be extracted and added into the knowledge graph for further recognition. So we have a lot of different emails within here. I'm going to click on just this top one, and we'll be able to see that this is a person who is complaining that they've been targeted by scammers purporting to be staff members of the bank by phone, email, and letters, insisting that they send Bitcoin to this address. If we look at a few of the others, we can see that this is a common theme. So what I want to do is take this particular Bitcoin or crypto wallet address, run a custom link, and say I want to search for this within our graph. And the data breach notification workflow will, as I say, take key entities and populate them into graph. And this is saying essentially search my graph for where this crypto wallet has been seen. this will start to populate this out. But we have 10 hits that actually relate to some messages, but we're going to go a bit further on this. Simply by using the mouse, I can click through and expand some of these. So I can see that this particular crypto wallet address appears in a number of emails that we saw before. If I pick a particular email, for example, I can expand that and see that this is the person and their email address. They're emailing this customer service number, and that all of these are linked because they're all emails sent to that customer service at Export Bank, email address. But we can also see that we have some messages down here that are not related to these, but are related because they contain this crypto wallet. I can click on this, I can see just a high-level overview. This is the text of that message, and I can right-click and view that information within Neo Investigate. This is going to take this item, this text message, open up Nuix Investigate, and as long as I am authorized into that case, it will then show me that file. There we go. So I'll let that load through. I want to start exploring this in more detail whilst this is loading out. So I want to expand, and I can see there are 2 phone numbers, which makes sense, it's a text message, and there's a topic. So the topics are generated by our cognitive AI. So we have this topic of cryptocurrency. Again, makes sense. But if I was approaching this, look and saying, show me all items within my data set that relate to cryptocurrency, I could also then find this message as a result. We can see that through the data I'm looking at, we've actually got access to these 2 phone numbers that have a lot more messages associated with them, a lot more entities. If I open this, I can see there's 19 more Nuix items and 1 person, the Kobayashi. And this particular one has a Pete Gibbons. If I expand this further, I can find that there is an email address that relates to an email. That has more people in. So I can follow this through. We have a person who is communicating with an external person via text message around crypto wallets. That crypto wallet has been found, this crypto address here has been found in these emails, all reporting potentially fraudulent information. But our main suspect here, Pete Gibbons, if you remember him from before, works for Export Bank, has sent emails to other people within the bank, but has actually also had a conversation and is linked to Felix Schumacher, who is one of the people that reported this fraudulent activity. So just at a high-level view, we can see we actually have a very strong case against Mr. Gibbons here, in that we've got very strong links that would paint the picture that Pete is involved somehow in the fraudulent activity and the proliferation of the scam requests for transferring a Bitcoin into this crypto wallet. That comes to the end of my demonstration. I hope this has proved useful to you, and I really thank you ever so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Arnie, back to you.
Thank you, Aidan. That was indeed a very exciting and engaging presentation. So for everyone's benefit, Aidan walked us through not just the ability to understand and look at, from a risk exposure perspective within the organization, various data assets, and how from a data breach readiness perspective, anyone could have a look at what they have in their repository, but also should there be a scenario of a breach, how that can be leveraged in terms of the same platform to go and look at identifiable items and connections and be able to understand how the various entities are linked up in terms of our use of our knowledge graph. So with that, it brings us to the end of the webinar. As I said at the beginning, we will be sending out some surveys. We really appreciate your time and patience for attending this webinar. Please fill out the surveys. Let us know what you think, what works, and what you'd like to see more of in the future. And we would love to come back to you with other webinars that talk through and cover some of the other exciting aspects of Nuix's solutions. With that, I will end this webinar for today, and thank you again for being with us and attending and listening in. Have a great day. Bye.
you.